Doctor had studied grief for 300 years. As for the Galactic Council, she had witnessed the mourning rituals of 100 species. She had recorded the silent crystallization of the when their home star dimmed. She had documented the sonic wails of the during their population collapse. She had even observed the mathematical prayers of her own people, the Kum Collective, when quantum disease had fragmented part of their hive mind. But she had never seen the Galactic Sorrow Index do what it did 847 cycles ago. The index was older than most civilizations. It measured collective grief across all member species through quantum empathic resonance, a natural phenomenon discovered millions of years ago. The number fluctuated, of course. Wars pushed it higher. Medical breakthroughs brought it lower. But it always stayed within predictable ranges, a gentle wave that rose and fell with the fortunes of galactic civilization. Until the day it spiked so violently that scientists thought the measurement system had broken. Stood in the Council's central observatory, her 4 eyes fixed on the holographic display. The spike was a jagged mountain on an otherwise smooth plain. The numbers made no sense. The index had reached levels that should have required the extinction of a major species, but no such extinction had occurred. What happened on this date? She asked the station's AI. Humanity's first-generation ship, the Odyssey, was declared lost, the AI responded. 50,000 human souls. The ship vanished 3 light-years from its destination of B after 89 years of flight. Santerior eyes narrowed. 50,000 individuals. A tragic number, certainly, but humanity had 8 billion people on there alone. The extinction just 40 cycles earlier had claimed 6 billion lives, and the index had barely trembled. Why would this register so strongly? She wondered aloud. Unknown, the AI said. The phenomenon requires investigation. 3 weeks later arrived at Earth. She had studied humanity before, of course. Everyone had. They were the species to achieve faster-than-light travel, having joined the galactic community only 160 years ago. Young, impulsive, loud. They asked too many questions and ignored too many warnings. Their emotions ran hot compared to older species. Most council members found them exhausting. But they were not particularly empathic. Their quantum resonance field was average at best. There was no reason their grief should have affected the entire galaxy so dramatically. Expected to find Earth draped in mourning. She had prepared herself for ceremonies, memorials, perhaps even planet-wide moments of silence. She anticipated that she would need to be gentle, respectful, careful not to intrude on raw wounds. Instead, she found something that made her stop at the viewing port of the orbital station in shock. Earth's orbital space was crowded, not with grief, but with construction. Massive shipyards ringed the planet like a steel necklace. Smaller yards dotted every point. In the asteroid belt beyond Mars, mining operations lit up the darkness like fireflies, stripping entire asteroids down to their cores. Resources flowed in rivers of metal and ice toward construction sites that worked without pause. The human diplomat who met her was a woman named Sarah. She was young by human standards, perhaps 50 years old, with gray streaking through her black hair. Her eyes were tired but sharp. "Doctor," Sarah said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. "Welcome to Earth. I understand you're here about the index." "Yes," said, carefully matching the handshake. "The spike was unprecedented. We need to understand why your loss affected the galactic consciousness so profoundly." Sarah's expression shifted, something dark passing behind her eyes. "Our loss. The Odyssey, 50,000 souls, I'm very sorry." "Don't be sorry yet," Sarah said quietly. "Come, I'll show you something." They took a shuttle down to Earth, landing at a facility in what humans call Geneva. The building was old by human standards, nearly 300 years, but it had been expanded recently. Inside, holographic displays covered every wall showing ship designs, mathematical models, scanning patterns, resource allocation charts. Hundreds of humans worked at consoles, their faces lit by blue light. The energy in the room was not the heavy stillness of morning. It was something else entirely, something fierce. "This is the Odyssey Recovery Initiative," Sarah explained. "Every human government unified to create it. We've pooled our resources, our scientists, our best minds. We have one goal." "To find them," said softly. "To bring them home." Sarah's voice was iron. Looked around the room. "But the ship has been gone for nearly a century of your time. The likelihood of survival." "We don't care about likelihood," a man said, approaching them. He was older, perhaps 70, with dark skin and white hair. His name tag read Dr. James, chief physicist. "We care about possibility. If there's even a chance they're alive, we find them. If they're dead, we still find them. Those people deserve to come home." "But the scale of space," said, trying to make them understand. "The number of possible trajectories, the sensor limitations." "We're aware of the challenges," James said. His tone was patient but unyielding. "We're building a sensor network that will cover this entire sector. We're developing new scanning technology. We're training crews for deep space search operations. We've diverted 30% of our total economic output to this effort." Felt a chill run through her body. 30%, that will slow your development by decades. "Yes," Sarah said simply. "Your people agree to this." "Our people demanded it." Sarah pulled up a holographic display showing poll numbers. 94% support. The 6% who don't mostly think we're not doing enough. Stared at the numbers. In her 300 years of life, she had never seen such unity in any species over anything, let alone something that would cost so much for such uncertain gain. "I don't understand," she admitted. "The Cum Collective ran probability matrices when we heard about the loss. The chance of finding your ship, even with advanced technology, is less than 3%. The resources required would bankrupt systems. Why would you?" "Because they're ours," Sarah interrupted. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through everything else. "Those 50,000 people, they trusted us. They climbed into that ship and aimed themselves at the stars because they believed humanity's future was out there. They knew they'd never see Earth again. They knew their children wouldn't either. They accepted that sacrifice for all of us." "And now they're gone," said gently. "They're lost," Sarah corrected. "There's a difference. Gone means we accepted it. Lost means we're still looking." James gestured to the displays around them. "Every person in this facility knew someone on the Odyssey. My granddaughter was on that ship. She was 12 when they launched. She'd be 101 now if she lived. Probably has great of her own by now, born in space." "You think they survived?" asked. "I think it doesn't matter," James said. "If they're alive, we bring them home. If they're dead, we bring them home. Either way, we don't stop looking. That's what it means to be human. We don't leave our people behind." Over the following weeks, traveled across human space. She visited shipyards where workers volunteered for double shifts. She interviewed scientists who had abandoned more prestigious research to join the search. She attended a concert where a composer had written a symphony called The Long Search, and watched as 20,000 humans sat in complete silence, listening to music that sounded like hope mixed with determination. She also accessed Earth's historical records. She read about rescue operations that had taken years. She learned about searches for single individuals that had mobilized thousands. She discovered a concept they called "leave no one behind" that appeared in their military culture, their disaster response, their very philosophy of what it meant to be human. And slowly, she began to understand. The Galactic Sorrow Index hadn't spiked because humans were grieving. It had spiked because every other species in the galaxy was grieving for them. The older civilizations, the ones who had forgotten what it meant to value individual lives over statistical probability, had felt something they hadn't experienced in millions of years: vicarious sorrow. Empathic pain for a species that had just learned to reach the stars, only to lose their first brave attempt at true interstellar colonization. The galaxy had mourned for humanity's loss of innocence. But humanity hadn't lost anything except time. Stood in the observation deck of the orbital station on her last day, looking down at Earth. The construction continued without pause. Lights glittered across the planet's night side, factories and research centers working around the clock. Sarah joined her at the viewport. "You'll report your findings to the council?" Sarah asked. "Yes," said, "though I'm not sure they'll understand. That we're foolish, that we're wasting resources on an impossible dream." "That you're not mourning at all," said quietly. "You're hunting, and that terrifies me a little." Sarah smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Good, it should, because when we find them, and we will find them, the galaxy will learn something about humanity. We don't accept loss. We don't calculate acceptable casualties. Every single person matters. Every single life has value beyond mathematics." "That's not sustainable," said. "Not across galactic scales, not across millions of years." "Maybe not," Sarah agreed. "But it's who we are, and we'd rather break ourselves trying than become the kind of species that can look at 50,000 lost souls and decide they're not worth the effort." Left Earth with more questions than answers. But as her ship jumped to faster-than-light speeds, she looked at her data one more time. The Galactic Sorrow Index was falling now, slowly but steadily. Not because anyone had forgotten the Odyssey, but because the galaxy was watching humanity search, and somehow, impossibly, that searching gave them all hope. 43 years later, received an urgent message from Earth. She was older now, well past 400 years, and had spent most of that time writing about humanity. Her books on human psychology had become required reading in courses across the galaxy. Students found humans fascinating in the way one might find a beautiful but dangerous creature fascinating. The message was brief: "We found something, come immediately." She arrived at a human research station in deep space, far from any star. The station was small, designed for a crew of only 30, but it bristled with sensor arrays and scientific equipment. Dr. James met her at the airlock. He was ancient now, over 110 years old, kept alive by medical technology that humans had traded favors across the galaxy to obtain. His body was frail, but his eyes were sharp as ever. "James," she said, greeting him warmly. They had stayed in contact over the decades. "What did you find?" "Come see," he said, and led her to the main laboratory. The room was crowded with humans, all staring at a holographic display. On it was something that looked like a tear in space itself, a rippling distortion that bent light around it. "A subspace rift," James explained. "Natural formation. We didn't think they could exist outside of black hole event horizons, but here it is. And doctor, the trajectory lines up perfectly. The Odyssey flew straight into it." Felt her heart skip. "What does it do?" "It doesn't destroy," a younger woman said. She was perhaps 60, with brilliant red hair going gray. "It displaces. Matter that enters gets flung out somewhere else in the galaxy. We don't know exactly how far, but based on the energy readings, it could be thousands of light years." "So the ship could still be intact," breathed. "The ship, the people, everything," James said. His voice shook slightly. "They could still be alive." The implications crashed over like a wave. "Have you told the council?" "We sent our findings 3 days ago," James said. "We're scheduled to present tomorrow." The next day, sat in the council chambers and watched humanity make their case. Sarah was there too, now in her 90s, walking with a cane but still fierce. The holographic displays showed all their data, their calculations, their theories. The council listened in silence. When the presentation ended, the voting began. The Cum Collective spoke first through their consensus voice. "The probability of locating one ship in a galaxy of 400 billion stars is effectively zero. Even if we knew the rift's exact displacement distance, the search volume would be impossible to scan. The resource expenditure would bankrupt solar systems." The crystalline agreed. We calculate a 2.7% chance of success over a search period of 10,000 years. This is not efficient use of galactic resources. Species after species voted the same way. The mathematics were clear. The logic was sound. The search was, in the words of the ancient communion, cosmically impractical. When it came time for humanity's vote, Sarah stood slowly. "We understand your calculations," she said quietly. "We've run the same numbers. We know the odds. We know what you're all saying makes sense from a logical standpoint." She paused, looking around at the assembled species, some of whom had existed for millions of years before humanity had even evolved. "We're going to search anyway," she said. A ripple went through the council. The Cum Collective's voice carried confusion. "Did you not comprehend our analysis?" "We comprehend it perfectly," Sarah said. "We just reject the conclusion. Those 50,000 people matter, every single one of them. The odds don't change that. The difficulty doesn't change that. If there's any chance they're alive, we look. If they're dead, we still look because they deserve to be found." "This will cost you decades of development," they chimed, their crystalline voice like bells. "Perhaps centuries. Your species will fall behind others in technology, in expansion, in everything that matters." "What matters," Sarah said, and her voice was iron now, "is that we don't become the kind of species that abandons our people because the math says it's too hard. We'd rather be poor and searching than rich and indifferent." The vote was recorded. Humanity stood alone. The search was classified as cosmically impractical. No species would officially support it. But then something unexpected happened. As the council session ended and delegates began to leave, a young representative from the swarm approached Sarah. They were only 3,000 years into their civilization, young by galactic standards. "We cannot officially help," they said, mandibles clicking nervously. "But our deep space scanning data will be available in our public archives, all of it, updated daily." Sarah stared at the alien. "That's thank you." Over the next week, 17 other species, all young civilizations, made similar quiet offers. They couldn't provide ships or resources, but they could share data. Sensor readings, astronomical surveys, anything that might help narrow the search. Watched it all and realized something profound was happening. The old species, the ones who had existed for millions of years, had grown cold in their efficiency. They had optimized compassion out of their cultures because it was inefficient. But the young species still remembered what it felt like to struggle. They remembered what it meant to value the few over the many, and humanity's determination reminded them of themselves. The sorrow index began to fall, not quickly but steadily, like a wound slowly healing. Requested a sabbatical from her university and joined the human search effort. She was too old to care about her career anymore, and she wanted to see how this story ended. The search was vast and methodical. Humans divided the galaxy into sectors based on possible displacement distances from the rift. They built specialized sensor ships designed to detect the specific energy signatures of their old fusion drives. They trained crews to spend years in deep space, jumping from star to star, scanning, recording, moving on. It was tedious work. Most days brought nothing. 99.9% of the time, the scans showed empty space or uninhabited systems. But the humans kept searching. Spent time on various search vessels, interviewing crews, recording their experiences. On one ship, she met a woman named whose great-grandmother had been on the Odyssey, was 35, and had spent her entire adult life in the search fleet. "Why do you do this?" asked during a quiet moment in the mess hall. "You never knew your great-grandmother. The odds say you'll spend your whole life searching and find nothing." Looked at her with those intense human eyes. "My great-grandmother was a botanist. She maintained the ship's food gardens. She loved orchids, apparently, raised hundreds of varieties." She smiled slightly. "I'm a botanist, too. I work on our hydroponics bay. Sometimes I wonder if somewhere out there, if she's alive, if she's still growing orchids. Maybe she developed new varieties. Maybe she taught her children and they taught theirs. And now there's a whole tradition of space-borne orchid cultivation that exists nowhere else in the galaxy. And if she's dead, asked gently, then I'm still a botanist because of her, said. Because somewhere in my genes is her love for growing things, and I owe it to her to try. That's what family means. Watched as years turned into decades, the search continued. Human ships pushed farther into unexplored regions of the galaxy. They made first contact with 6 new species during their search because they went places no one else bothered to go. The Galactic Council released a report after a century of searching, concluding that the Odyssey was certainly lost and humanity should accept this reality. The report was calm, logical, and compassionate in its way. It suggested humanity should honor the dead and move forward. Humanity's official response was a single sentence: "We'll let you know when we're done searching." Another century passed, then another. Children were born into the search fleet who knew nothing else. Whole careers were spent scanning empty space. Sustained by life extension treatments she had earned through her research, watched generation after generation of humans join the effort. And the sorrow index kept falling. Slowly, impossibly, it was reaching levels it hadn't seen in millions of years. Because something was changing in the galaxy. The younger species were watching humanity search for over 2 centuries, and they were learning something the old species had forgotten. That hope is not a calculation, and some things are worth doing even when the numbers say to stop. 3 young civilizations announced they were implementing human-style rescue doctrines. The swarm formally abolished their practice of leaving behind damaged hive ships. The Republic rewrote their military code to include the phrase, "leave no one behind," borrowed directly from human culture. The old species watched with something between confusion and concern. The Cum Collective released a paper titled "The Contagion of Irrational Compassion." They meant it as a warning. The younger species read it as an instruction manual. Was over 600 years old, ancient even for her species, when she received the message that would change everything. A human survey ship operating in the Sagittarius Arm, 40,000 light-years from Earth, had detected something while investigating quantum wake patterns. A radio signal, old format, playing music from the 22nd century. Humanity had found the Odyssey. The rescue fleet took 3 months to reach the coordinates. Traveled with them, along with observers from 43 different species. Even some of the old civilizations sent representatives, though they claimed it was purely for scientific documentation. The Odyssey hung in orbit around a dying red dwarf star, so far from Earth that the Milky Way itself looked different from this angle. The ship was, and patched, its hull bearing the marks of centuries of makeshift repairs. But it was intact, and its lights were on. Captain Maria commanded the lead rescue ship. She was 50 years old and had spent her entire career in the search fleet. Her grandfather had been one of the original searchers, back when the Odyssey first disappeared. This was, in many ways, her inheritance. "Odyssey, this is Earth ship Persistence," Maria said into the comm, her voice careful and controlled. "We've come to bring you home." The silence stretched for 3 minutes. Then a voice responded, shaky and disbelieving. "Persistence, this is Odyssey. We never stopped broadcasting, we never stopped hopping. Is this real?" "This is real," Maria said, and her voice broke just slightly. "You're not lost anymore." The docking procedures took hours. Every protocol had to be checked and rechecked. The Odyssey's air might be contaminated. There might be diseases. The generation ship's inhabitants had lived in isolation for over 2 centuries of real time. They might have changed in ways no one could predict. But when the airlocks finally opened, and the first person from the Odyssey stepped through, saw something she would remember for the rest of her very long life. He was young, perhaps 25 by human standards. He had been born in space, had never seen a planet, would likely never be able to live in full gravity. His bones were too light, his muscles too weak. He represented the seventh generation born on that ship. And he was crying. "We thought Earth forgot about us," he said to Maria. "We thought we'd die out here, unknown and unmourned." Maria reached out and gripped his shoulder. "Humanity doesn't forget. We don't leave our people behind. That's not who we are." Over the next days, the full story emerged. The Odyssey had indeed been thrown through the rift, displaced across 40,000 light-years in an instant. The journey had damaged systems, killed nearly half the original crew, and left them stranded with no way to call for help except their primitive radio broadcasts that would take 40,000 years to reach Earth naturally. But they had survived. They had kept the ecosystem running. They had raised children and taught them everything about Earth, about humanity, about the home they would never see. They had maintained hope across 7 generations because they believed, somehow, that someone was looking for them. And they had been right. The population had dropped from 50,000 to just over 8,000. Disease, accidents, and the simple difficulties of maintaining a closed system for over 2 centuries had taken their toll. But 8,000 souls still lived, and each one was a miracle of human determination. Interviewed many of them. She spoke with the current head of the botanical section, a woman named, whose great-great-great-grandmother had been the original head botanist. "We kept records of everything," explained, showing digital files going back to the original crew. "Every birth, every death, every discovery we made. We wanted Earth to know what happened to us, even if they found us 1,000 years from now, even if they only found our ship as a tomb." "Did you think they were searching?" asked. Smiled. "We hoped. We had debates about it, actually. Some people thought Earth would mourn and move on, but most of us believed that if humanity could search, they would. Because that's what the stories taught us. Every story from Earth, every history lesson, it all said the same thing. Humans don't abandon their own." The rescued population faced a choice. They could return to Earth, try to adapt to gravity, live out their lives as curiosities in a world they had only heard about in stories, or they could continue the original mission. After a week of discussion, they made their decision. They would continue to be, but not alone. The Odyssey would be refitted with modern technology, its damaged systems replaced, its capabilities expanded, and they would be accompanied. Because something remarkable had happened. When the galaxy learned that the Odyssey had been found, that the impossible search had succeeded, that humanity had kept looking for 217 years and succeeded against all probability, something shifted. 23 species volunteered ships to accompany the Odyssey, to be not to take over the mission, not to claim credit, but to witness it, to be part of the moment when humanity completed what they had started over 3 centuries ago. The Qum Collective, who had called the search cosmically impractical, sent a delegation to tour the Odyssey. They spent 3 days interviewing the inhabitants, trying to understand how a culture could maintain identity and purpose across such isolation. Their representative, a consensus voice named, spoke within the observation lounge of the Persistence. "We don't understand," said, their voice carrying the confusion of their entire hive. "The mathematics were clear. The search should have failed." "The mathematics didn't account for stubbornness," said gently. "Is that what you call it?" Watched through the viewport as human engineers worked on the Odyssey's hull. "We call it irrational resource allocation, but we're beginning to think we've been wrong about what resources matter most." "What do you mean?" "Hope is a resource," said slowly, as if the words were strange in their mouth. "We calculated the cost in metal, in energy, in time. We never calculated the cost of not searching. The cost to the soul of a civilization when it decides some lives aren't worth the effort." Looked at the Qum representative with surprise. "That's very human of you." "Yes," said, and a portion of our collective has split off because of it. They want to embrace what they call the human irrationality. They believe we've optimized ourselves into emptiness. The split has been difficult. I'm sorry, said. Don't be. Pain means we're still alive, still capable of growth. Translation matrix made their next words sound almost wistful. We've existed for 14 million years. In all that time, we've never changed our fundamental nature. Humanity has existed for less than 1 million, and they've changed dramatically dozens of times. We thought that made them weak. Now we wonder if it makes them strong. The Galactic Sorrow Index, which had been falling steadily throughout the search, plummeted to its lowest recorded level when the Odyssey was found. But notice something else in the data. The overall baseline was shifting. The index wasn't just measuring sorrow anymore. It was measuring something else that didn't have a name in most languages. Humans called it hope. 3 months after the discovery, 17 species formally apologized to humanity. Not for the Odyssey's loss, which had been natural disaster, but for their failure to help search, for voting that the search was impractical, for their cold mathematics that weighed lives against resources and found individual worth wanting. The WHO's crystalline nature made emotion difficult, sent a message that was displayed across every human network. We have existed for 9 million years and forgotten what it means for one life to matter. You remembered for us. Thank you. Watched as the Odyssey was refitted. Modern engines replaced the old fusion drives. Advanced life support systems were installed. The ship that had barely survived for 217 years was transformed into something that could thrive for another 1,000. But the inhabitants insisted on keeping certain things. The old hydroponics bay, with its ancient orchid collection that had survived against all odds. The memorial wall, where every person who had died during the isolation was remembered by name. The original ship's bell, which had rung for every birth and every death and every important moment for over 2 centuries. The botanist from the search fleet requested permission to join the Odyssey's crew. She wanted to meet the woman who had maintained the orchid collection, to learn the techniques developed in isolation, to connect her bloodline's past with its future. My great-grandmother started this journey, told Maria. I want to see it finished. On the day the Odyssey departed for B, escorted by 23 ships from across the galaxy, stood on the observation deck of the Persistence and watched. The human crew around her was quiet, many crying openly. Maria stood beside her. You've been with us a long time, Doctor, nearly 200 years. Yes, said. I wanted to see how the story ended. Is this the end? Maria asked. No, said, watching the fleet disappear into faster-than-light travel. I think it's a beginning. Humanity taught the galaxy something we had forgotten, that some things matter beyond calculation, that hope is not mathematics, that the search is worth conducting even when every number says to stop. Because if we stop searching, what are we? Maria said softly. Exactly. Pulled up her data pad showing Maria the sorrow index. Look at this. The baseline has shifted. For the first time in 3 million years, the galactic consciousness is fundamentally different, and it's because of you. We just looked for our people, Maria said. No, corrected. You taught us all what it means to value a single voice crying out in the dark. You showed us that distance and probability cannot erase whether someone matters. Over the next decades, changes rippled through the galaxy. Young civilizations adopted human-style rescue doctrines. The concept of leave no one behind spread from species to species. Even some of the old civilizations began to quietly reform their policies on acceptable losses. The Qum Collective's split became permanent. The new faction called themselves the Seekers, and they devoted themselves to finding lost people from any species. They said they were learning to be less efficient and more alive. Wrote her final book at 640 years old. She called it The Paradox of Persistent Value. The thesis was simple: humanity's greatest strength, and their greatest challenge to galactic order was their refusal to accept that anyone could be written off as statistically acceptable loss. The book became required reading across the galaxy, not because it praised humanity, but because it asked every species a simple question: what have we optimized away? What did we sacrifice in our millions of years of existence that humans, in their brief moment of galactic presence, still retained? The Odyssey reached B 3 years after leaving the rescue point. The planet was habitable, beautiful, and empty. The descendants of the original crew stepped onto its surface as the first humans born in deep space to walk on a world. Planted the first orchid in soil, using a cutting from the collection that had survived 217 years in space. She recorded a message that was broadcast across the galaxy. This is, botanist of the Odyssey, we completed our mission. It took 306 years from launch, but we made it. And we made it because someone kept looking, because humanity doesn't forget, because we believe every person matters. She paused, touching the orchid gently. To every species watching this, don't become so old, so wise, so efficient that you forget what it feels like to search for someone in the dark. Don't optimize compassion into obsolescence. Stay young enough to be foolish. Stay human, even if you're not human. The message reached Earth 3 days later. It reached the Kum a week after that. Within a month, it had spread to every corner of the galaxy. And the Galactic Sorrow Index, which had measured only grief for 3 million years, registered something new. Something that had no name in most languages, but that every species felt in their own way. Humans called it joy. Died peacefully at 662 years old, having lived longer than most of her species, because she had found something worth extending her life for. Her last words, recorded by the medical staff, were simple. They found them. The impossible search succeeded. I got to watch humanity teach the galaxy how to hope again. What a gift that was. The Odyssey settlement on B grew. The 23 species who had escorted them stayed, helping build, learning from each other, creating something new. A civilization founded not on conquest or necessity, but on the principle that some journeys are worth completing no matter how long they take. And somewhere in Earth's orbit, in the memorial station built to honor the search, a display showed the final statistics. 217 years of searching, 12 generations of searchers, 863 ships devoted to the effort, over 2 trillion work hours invested. For 8,000 souls. The math said it was impractical, the numbers said it was wasteful, the logic said it was impossible. Humanity had never cared much for math.